Hello, everyone. I'll give you a second to get connected to sound. Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1233rd New Social Environment. I'm Magley, a programs associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Morgan Jerkins and Stephen Patrick Bell. And now I'll introduce today's guests and host. Morgan Jerkins is the author of Caul Baby, Wandering in Strange Lands, and the New York Times bestseller, This Will Be My Undoing. Jerkins has taught at Columbia and Princeton Universities and has written for The New Yorker, The New York Times, The Atlantic, Rolling Stone, Vanity Fair, and The Guardian, among many others. She lives in New York. And our host today, Stephen Patrick Bell, is a writer, editor, and producer raised in New York by Jamaican immigrants, currently based in Chicago, where he produces shows for the Moth StorySLAM and Second Story. He serves as the interviews editor at Foglifter Journal and Press. His work has appeared in Interview Magazine, the Chicago Review of Books, the Los Angeles Review of Books, and elsewhere. And he is currently working on a novel. And with that, I will hand it over to Stephen to get us started.
All right. Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you, Brooklyn Rail, for having us. I am really excited to get into this amazing book that's come across my desk very recently because it's only just come out, but I inhaled it. If you haven't had a chance to read it yet, you are in for a treat. And if you have, get ready to talk about it. There will be a link for you to put in your questions and everything, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how the audience has been taking in this piece. Um, I know that we're, moisturized, hydrated, and well fed, but I just want to say that Morgan is going to read from this book. I think it's going to be one of my favorite sections, actually. Um, we also have an image that we talked about a little bit. One of the things that I loved about this book is how it does have this breadth of the types of art that it talks about. So we get a lot of the written word because it is a novel and it does sort of center around a letter, but there's also music and visual art that's really important throughout. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from Morgan. So I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you. All right. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for just being here with me and Stephen this afternoon. I was about to say this evening. Um, I want to give a brief context of what I'm about to read. It's actually one of my favorite scenes in Zeal. Zeal is the story of, well, it begins before, after the prologue, is there's this Union soldier by the name of Harrison who returns to Natchez, Mississippi after the end of the Civil War because he promised his beloved Tirza that he would come back for her, only to find out that she's gone. The reason why she's gone is because her master, Spencer Ambrose, when he knew that Union forces were coming to ransack Natchez, basically, he went to one of the last Confederate strongholds in the United States, which was Shreveport, Louisiana. And he is a terrible human being, for lack of a better phrase. He does not respect Tirza, her bodily autonomy. You can imagine what life was like for a recently freed Black woman in the Deep South. And while she's trying to survive and make her way and then hopefully make her way back to Harrison, she has caught the eye of this very charismatic preacher named Isaac. They have spent a night together, and he is trying to teach her a form of protection because he notices that Tirza has to figure out a way to defend herself against these racist white men, particularly Spencer. And so she goes to his house and she notices that despite him being a very erudite preacher, he has a gun. And so I'm going to read the scene that happens next. In the backyard, Tirza perched on a stool with her legs crossed as Isaac readied the training. He removed the ammunition and magazines from the revolver and filled them with snap caps to prevent an accidental discharge, then proceeded to arrange several stools in a row 10 feet from Tirza. One by one, he placed one object on each stool: an orange, a watermelon, a tin can, a head of cabbage. It was hours, though, before he let her pull the trigger. During that time, he taught her the autonomy of the anatomy of the gun, demonstrated for her different stances to get a good aim, and made her practice withdrawing it from her dress to shoot until she was confident in the motion. Eventually, he said, "Now go ahead and shoot." "Which one?" "Anyone. If multiple people are coming at you, does it matter?" Tirza closed her eyes and pulled the trigger, hitting the leg of the middle stool. He chuckled. "I knew you were going to do that, which is why I didn't pack the gun with real bullets." "Do what?" "You closed your eyes. Keep your eyes open at all times. If you pull your gun, you better meet it. So take your time, reholster, and try again." Tirza drew the gun with her arms fully extended and pulled the trigger only to hit the leg of another stool. Frustrated, she reholstered and said, "I can't do it. It's too hard." "But you see what you just did?" "What?" "You reholstered quickly. You didn't you didn't point the gun at the ground or flail your arms or hit a bird or something. Your body is getting used to it now." He inched closer. "If I may?" Tirza nodded. Isaac placed his hand on the small of her back and whispered into her ear, "Best way to get better is to focus like a hawk does on its prey. Remember, you are not the prey. You're the hawk. He's not in control. You are. Control your body here." Isaac pointed to her temple. "And here," he said as he indicated her dominant hand. "I am in control of my body," Tirza said. "Yes, I am the hawk and not the prey. Not anymore, you're not. That's it." Isaac inched backward and folded his arms across his chest. "Whenever you're ready." The harder Tirza focused, the quieter everything around her became, until all she could hear was her heart thumping in both her ears. She silently repeated to herself, "I am the hawk and not the prey." The phrase helped her to withstand all the memories of powerlessness she carried with her, recollections that usually converged and morphed into one large specter of shame. Once she acknowledged the ghost, though, the shame was overtaken by a sharp rage. She held the gun up to eye level and pulled the trigger. The bullet penetrated the watermelon, causing a dazzling explosion of rind and flesh. Isaac clapped exuberantly, but Tirza took the time to reholster the gun and feel the leather next to her skin. The texture didn't feel simply good. It felt liberating. For a minute, she thought of that leather wallet, long lost to her now. One by one, she shot each of the other targets with either one or both hands. Then she asked Isaac to add new targets, but the temperature had now cooled, and the sky was a melange of azure, magenta, and tangerine. "I think it's time to get you home," said Isaac.
Thank you. Thank you for reading that. That's one of my favorite moments in this book because this is a book full of really great characters, but I love Tirza so much. And there's something really interesting about the ways that Tirza sort of embodies and embraces her autonomy as she grows as a character. And I think, she's a character in a book full of Black people, but because they all have these struggles as Black people, they have something in common, but she is a Black woman. And I think that there's really something interesting that happens in some of those moments where she has even more constraints on her because of her womanhood.
Mm-hmm.
How how much of this was part of Tirza and this evolution and this arc was part of that when you found the letter and thought about making this character around her?
Oh, that's such a great question. So, part of this book was inspired by an actual letter that an enslaved man wrote through an intermediary to his wife on another plantation. And tears that came to me. It was a bit like delusions of grandeur. But when I set out to write a love story, I told myself that I want this to be an epic. The difference is, though, the people involved in the epic look like me. And when I thought of Tears, I thought, I want her to become such a canonical character that someone can say her name with one word and they know exactly what she means or exactly what she represents, like a Setha or a tea cake. or a Desdemona or something like that. I mean, that's how sometimes you have to think as a writer. Like I'm doing my big one with this, as you say. So I love that you said that she meant something to you, because there were quite a few other people that said the same. And I love all characters, but I love Tirza the most because she is such a reminder of where we came from. And also, spoiler alert, she transitions on peacefully, which was not afforded to a lot of Black people of her time. And she demonstrated such great character and such determination. And I felt like I had to make so much aesthetic and ethical choices around her and how she moved in and out of space, that I really wanted her to become almost larger than life.
And she is. I'm going to be thinking about her for a long time. So I really appreciate you
Thank you.
bringing her to us. But there are a lot of other things that I'm hearing in this that are. Could you talk a little bit about the letter that kind of inspired this book?
Yeah, so I knew that I wanted to write a love story, and I wanted a love story set against the backdrop of American history. And I knew if I was going to do that, being the history nerd that I am, I was going to need some help. And so I was fortunate enough to get a generous enough book deal from my publisher, Harper Collins, that I could afford a assistant, temporary, but an assistant. And there was this woman by the name of Barry Brown, who worked at the Schomburg. And I was interviewing with her and I was telling her my premise. And before she even got the job, she emailed me and said, I need you to look at something because I think this is relevant to your work. And it was a 4-page letter donated from a family to the Schomburg by a man named James Tate, addressed February 4th, 1863, to his wife Olivia. And a woman named Maria helped him write it. And it was so intact, you would have thought that it was written 20 years ago. And in it, he says that his master wants him to forget about her and he wants to let her know he hasn't forgotten about her. And in fact, it wasn't until probably a month before my publication date, I had a friend of mine that said, can you ever figure out what happened to him? And I was afraid because it's like, there's sort of like an absence, an omission in archives or something tragic. And I found out that James and Olivia actually did reunite. They're buried in the same cemetery in Atlanta. He is actually one of the most well-known Black businessmen in Atlanta history.
That is so warm and fuzzy and touching because this book, I mean, this book is full of a lot of narratives from that time period coming up into the present, and it's inevitable that there will be tragedies
Mm-hmm.
and all of that, but you do give us some moments of hope and some moments of grace and some moments of like respite from the struggle without taking away or while still honoring all of those things and not
Mm-hmm.
negative and need to be shied away or hidden. Uh,
Right.
but it's really nice to hear that there are happy endings outside of the world of your fiction.
Yeah, and to know that, like, these people, they were separated, but now they're with each other eternally, if you believe in those sorts of things. Yeah.
Estrangement is a huge thing that keeps coming up in this work too. Not necessarily because the characters are making the choice not to be connected with each other, but just because of the structures of society that these characters often don't have control over who they're engaging with, how and when and why. Um, I just really found something interesting in the way that you handled the sexual relationships between these characters, because a lot of times there's a lot of judgment and a lot of sort of shame around romantic relationships that are ended and then resumed and sort of running parallel to one another. Um, but the ways that you handled the intimacies between the characters and sort of the grace that they give each other when they are doing bad things. Could you talk about the way that you thought about depicting those and portraying those and sort of working through those moments?
Of course. Yeah, I mean, I'm a Black American woman. I'm a descendant of enslaved people. The first time I was taught about enslaved women and their experience was through the lens of rape, trigger warning. And it was made even more prevalent by my skin color. It was more pronounced that this was the lineage that I came from. And so as I was writing this book, I'm like, okay, you're writing a love story. It's beginning all the way in 1865 with memories of previous years. I had to push against that in a way, but also remind myself that like it wasn't, I'm not going to romanticize plantation life. I wanted people to understand that the violence towards Black people during slavery and definitely during Reconstruction was normal, that it was not spectacular. Our bodies were a spectacle, but it was not spectacular what was done to us. When it came to the Black women that were depicted, I told myself, how do I make sure I don't re-traumatize the audience? Because there are going to be Black people, Black women that held these stories in their bodies, and they're going to read this and feel some type of way. Also, I don't want to write that. I can talk about it, but like, for example, I can introduce that subject by showing its aftermath because that's what lingers more than the act itself. And also, to be honest, like writing about the ways enslaved people still had autonomy in a way, that they still experimented with each other, that was actually fun. Like the part where Tirza goes to the church, the main church in Shreveport, after she finds out that Black people are freed. And Isaac is preaching on the pulpit and she's self-conscious. You can just sort of see how, you can sort of visualize how she's like looking around because she's thinking of a time where she heard him preach in a forest about being free. And people were so afraid that, and enslaved people were so afraid they were leaving. And she stayed and they slept with each other. This preacher man, like they were not married. That was fun for me to write because sometimes the matters of the heart is a rebellion. And when your body isn't even considered your own, when your body and your systems, internal systems are just used for capital, those sort of tender moments are where the rebellion comes through. That's the humanity of it all. And I think that sex, but especially love, is what helped me as a writer reinforce not only my humanity, but also the humanity of these people. So that's a long answer.
I love it though. It's perfect too because that comes across in a lot of the moments that these characters share with each other. I'm thinking especially of a moment where Harrison is disclosing very briefly some sexual trauma that he experienced, and Tears says, this doesn't change you, and that she sort of gives him a gift in that moment that I really resonated with. But
I'm glad you caught that because I was like, I don't. A lot of times, Black people don't have time to grieve. They gotta keep going. And in a moment where she's hiding from Spencer and his henchmen, and she says, "You don't understand." She's telling Isaac at the end one of the times, she's like, "You don't understand what it's like," alluding to sexual assault. And he's like, "Yes, I do." And it was that moment where it was like, "Oh." And so I'm really glad that you have such a astute eye that you caught that because I may not have talked a lot about male sexual assault, but it was a thing too. And it also lingered. And in fact, that's probably what helped. That's not help, but reinforced why Isaac was so bonded to her because he knew that type of predation, even as a man.
I want to step out of the text for a moment and then ask you a question about how is it that you go about writing these things that are triggering and traumatic and exploring those things while still protecting yourself?
I I treat myself with such gentle hands. I knew this trick, not trick, but sort of a habit when I was writing my second book, Wandering in Strange Lands. And I was trying to write about literally slave mortality rates on rice plantations in the low country, which is about as grim as you can imagine. And I remember I was sitting on my couch writing it, And I could just feel like the unease my body was in as I was writing it. And I remember I just inadvertently looked to the window and I saw the sun was setting and I just closed the tab. I was like, you're done. I was like, you can't let something like that rest on you, because then you won't get rest. You can't let that stick to you. Watch a Disney movie, listen to something whimsical, something to help to lighten the load of it. I actually had a friend of mine, she's like a digital archivist at the Smithsonian, and she was talking about that when people want to go and check out archives of previous places where she was employed, where they had to step out of the room. And she's trying to figure out how to be a better archivist for people who are more intimately attached to the articles that they're looking at. So for me, it's like there are certain scenes in the book, which I'm sure you can imagine, where I wrote it, and I was like, that's it. I got it out. Now I got to maybe get up and do some movements and dance to let the energy move. Maybe I have to light a candle. Maybe I have to buy myself flowers. Anything that can remind me that I am alive and that I'm doing work that I feel needs to be done, and that it is hard, and to acknowledge all the different contradictory feelings that I might be experiencing, and also lean on community too. Like, talk to them. That's been very helpful too.
It seems like you have a lot of archivist friends. And I love one of the things that I struggle with in historical fiction sometimes is that the characters are embedded in a moment of crisis or panic or urgency, and there's not enough space for them to look at the wider context. So, one of the things that I loved about the epic sort of shape of this book is that there's always someone looking back, or there's always a moment to reflect and see that these things that these characters were experiencing in these very sort of high tension moments happened in a much wider context that even they might not be aware of.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm not quite asking is how ha how are how's your experience in archives, in research, or I guess in just in general? Could you just talk to us about how researching this book was different from the others? Because this one is a bit tenderer. There's more of like emotional landscape going on, and I'm wondering if it's because we have these moments in the close to present that we get to reflect back on.
So two things. Um, the one thing is this book whooped my ass. I hope it's okay for me to say that. Like, it really did, because I was so worried about some historian finding a detail and be like, oh, she got that wrong. I'm discrediting the entire book, which no one would do that, because I didn't say that I was an historian. I'm not trained in that. But that's what I was afraid of. I was afraid of offending someone, particularly someone Black. But I mean, the attention to detail that I had done for this was obsessive. From the first chapter where I'm describing what Natchez looked like after the Civil War. Sometimes when I read it, I'm like, I can't, like, you know how long it took me to write like that. That even when I read it, it's not even self-deprecation. It's like, I can't even believe that came out of me, because I was so tired. I looked through like I looked through so many maps, so many sketches, so much historical accounts, and then when you hold space for that, now your creativity has to come in. And I was afraid of, like, because I knew that I had a big responsibility. You're talking about slavery, you're talking about Reconstruction, you're talking about something that this administration is currently trying to erase. So I had that in the back of my mind while I'm trying to write this novel. And so I definitely put that in, but also I reminded myself, I knew it was time to write because I saw Harrison. I was literally sweeping in my bathroom, and I saw this handsome man riding gallantly through the fields of Mississippi, and I could feel that heat. And I knew, it was like, I want readers to feel that too. I love stories where the character, where the towns and the cities are as much as characters as the human beings are. And so I wanted people to, you know, feel like they're in Kansas and they smell those wildflowers. I want them to feel like they're in Louisiana and they're looking at like, the local birds like migrating. I wanted them to be in Mississippi and to hear those steamboats wondering who's going to arrive. I wanted people to feel that. The second part of your question is, it's an emotional landscape that is much broader, not only because of the scope of the book, but also because of the scope of myself. This book of love would not be able to happen if I did not have love for myself. And I always tell people, I've been telling people this since I published my first book in 2018, that as a book evolves, you as a writer evolve. But Zeal was the type of book. I remember one of my closest friends, then Michelle Norris, she's the editor-in-chief of Electric Literature. That's just smiling. We were talking one night in the living room, and she was like, this is a grown woman's book. She's like, I know you were a grown woman when you wrote the first one, but this is a grown woman's book. And it's because, like, I learned to love me. Every part. I find joy in so many different parts of my life, and I found it. And that's why I was able to dig so deep inside myself to write these lines that Black women are now pulling out and saying, like, I had to highlight them because it came from how much I broadened and held space for my own emotional landscape in my own life.
I was a little bit mad at you for, I'm grateful for this opportunity that we're here talking, but I didn't want to read this book as quickly as I did because I did
Oh,
want
I was worried. I was like, mad at me for, we got to have a craft lesson up here. I'm like, I need to.
No, I just wanted to sit with the book because I was experiencing it on two different levels. And like as a reader, I was inhaling it because it does move really well. It's paced in such a great way where every time that we leave a character to go to another one, I wanted to stay with them, but I'm also really curious about where we're going. So
Right,
there
yeah.
was a
Yeah.
lot of great movement. But as a writer reading this book, I kept wondering, how did this happen? Because it's very intricately structured. And that obsessiveness that you're getting at, the attention to detail, I could feel that on the writerly level, even though the book moves really smoothly and is like just a really propulsive ride. I could tell that you were thinking a lot about how these characters were engaging with each other when they were and
Yeah.
stuff. So
Yeah.
how did you strike that balance? Did you outline like what was, I know that housing came to you, but like how did the whole story come together?
Sometimes I let historical moments move me in that way. So, for example, um, right after the Civil War, I'm thinking to myself, okay, so who are we now? What's going on? How is social order happening? That's what helped guide me into this sort of new era of how Black people were moving in and out of space. When you're thinking about Shreveport being the last Confederate stronghold, what are the attitudes of white people at that time? If this is like our last grasp of power, they feel like. If I'm thinking about Reconstruction era Louisiana, it was where Shreveport is based in Cattle Parish. It was actually called Bloody Cattle. It was actually called that. The coroner at the time left because of how violent it was, like unexpectedly left. And I used that to draw that funeral scene that I had in one of the chapters where Free is now a teenager and one of his friends was lynched. I think about the flood that brought Miriam to Kansas. That flood actually happened in Mississippi around that time. I think about the railroad that didn't come to Nicodemus, and it led to the decline of that Black town. That actually happened. They chose not to have the railroad go through there. So I let history guide me and thought to myself, okay, I have these moments. Now, how did these people exist in them? And I think so I let history provided the key, I provided the melody. And with regards to the obsession, I mean, it was the equivalent of, like, let's say you are a soprano and you hit that high C and the producer's like, do it again, 15 more times, do it again. And you feel like at the end that it's like a sponge that is squeezed of its vitality. And it's like, I don't have anything else to give. So even that obsession, that came in, even when I sent my editor pages, I was like, every time I felt like I couldn't get it right. I used to be so anxious that I thought to myself, they're going to cancel this book. I think maybe girls may have had an influence on me because I'm like, they canceled Hannah's book. They're going to cancel my, like, it's like, I just was like, maybe I don't have the range. Like maybe my ambition outpaced my actual capability. And weirdly enough, though, this is how I know writers can be crazy. It also was fun because, for example, I'll give two examples actually. When Harrison is making hibiscus tea, I wanted to do sweet tea. And then I found out, oh, there wasn't a published recipe for sweet tea until 2 years after where he's worked. Or for example, Tirza knows that the violence that she's seeing is because of Spencer, because a particular bottle that he drinks. It's a Madeira Cercial. And the reason why I knew that is because I actually contacted this big woolly mammoth of a white man. I hope he's not listening. And he was a food and drinks historian. And I literally said to you, I literally DM'd him on Twitter and I said, I have a very specific question. I said, if you were a part of the white Southern elite right after the Civil War, and you had a alcohol that signals to everyone that you were a part of this class, what would it be? And he was like, oh, a Madeira Cercial. That was fun. I love talking to other people and asking these questions because it helps fuel my Gemini brain of sleuthing. But and also even the newspaper where Tirza reads that newspaper and it says that, you know, people are free now. That was an actual newspaper from Shreveport at that time. So that was fun. But yeah, I mean, I'm not even gonna lie. And perhaps we can talk about like there are many times that I can reread what I wrote and it feels like a trance state. I don't remember. Like I just got into that zone so deeply that I don't know.
There are moments that I think writers all experience of doubt. And I think you've kind of alluded to experiencing a few of those. And I'm curious as to how do you know when things are going wrong? How do you fix them? And who pulls you out of those moments of doubt? Is it something that you're doing internally, or is it something that your community is helping you with, something that your editor or your agent is sort of encouraging you out of?
My agent was encouraging me, my friends, they've heard me cry multiple times. Every time they were like, you're not going to copy. Because, you know, that's the best part when you go to copy. Because if for all of you that don't know, copy means, you know, you're getting next check, you're getting a pub date, the wheels are in motion. And it was stress for me because at the time, I was finishing up teaching at Princeton. You know, speaking of engagement since post 2020, we're few and far between. So I was counting on that money. So there was added pressure for me to make a living while also having the support financially to be able to continue on and to not be drained. You know, I live by myself. So I leaned in on my community when I was crying. I was like, I can't get it right. There's a lot of pressure right now. That has helped me. And what was the other part of your question?
I'm just wondering what indicates to you that you're like back on track, or when do you know that it's right as opposed to when it's wrong, I guess.
All editors. When I love a good Google Doc comment that has exclamation points or love, or when editors like, oh, this is really good, I'll present this to the sales team. Yay! Like it's like, okay, but also, man, you know, there are times as a writer where you're like, I'm just trying to write. And then when you finish that session, you're like, ooh, that wasn't that I wrote something. And you know, there was something foundations being laid. And then there are other times where the line is so good and it makes your chest expand and you was like, I did that. I did that. Like there was a line I'll say to the audience where it's right in the beginning. Harrison comes back to Natchez and this guy named Ezekiel, they're riding in a carriage together because Ezekiel's like, you cannot be by yourself out here. Like, it's not safe. And Ezekiel is seeing how downtrodden Harrison is. And he's like, well, who is this woman? And Harrison's like, how do you know that? And Ezekiel points to his busted eye. And he's like, how do you think that I got this? And he talks about how he had a love for this woman on another plantation. And you know, she was just everything. And he said her love made the stripes on my back feel like paper cuts. When I wrote that line, even just like talking about it makes me emotional. When I wrote that line, I said, I will fight my editors on this line. We are, you're not getting it. When I wrote that line, that's when I was like, oh, there must be something beautiful here. Because even writing that line makes me feel good. I don't care if it's cheesy. For someone to be able to feel like they can keep going after being punished, that someone's love makes them feel stronger. That is something that it brings tears to my eyes. Like, it's just like, it was beautiful. And when I wrote that, I was like, I don't care. I feel good. It may not be the most stylistically advanced or elegant, but like, damn it, like sometimes you got to feel good. And I knew I had something then.
I always feel like when I'm entertaining myself, everyone else kind of follows. So
Okay.
I I'm thinking about your acknowledgement section because the first group that you thank
Mm-hmm.
are your ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk a little bit about how they influenced this book.
So I actually have an ancestor altar in my home. Um, but I had a really sort of weird experience that happened towards I'll explain it. I had a dream one night, and this I was stressed out. I didn't know whether or not this book was ever going to see the light of day. And I had a dream one night that I was pregnant, and I was in this very dimly lit home, and I was walking through the corridors that were lined with lit candles, and I could hear someone in the throes of labor in the other room. And rather than me being like nervous, like, oh crap, like what's going on, I woke up feeling really peaceful, and I thought to myself, I'm not pregnant in real life, thank God. Not right now. That was my book, because before I woke up, I could hear the names of my ancestors being spoken, almost like they're being read from a scroll. And I woke up very peaceful, and I thought to myself, oh, I'm not pregnant in real life. That's my book. My book. I'm pregnant with my book, and it's coming. And the reason why I was so big is because it's about to come. And 1 month later, my book went to copy. I tell that story because every time I go to the South, people always think I'm from there. I don't know if it's because of like the way I look or talk, or I don't anything like that. And I'm always inspired there because I'm so spiritually connected down south where my people are originally from. And like, I love talking about the ancestors because they've always looked out for me. Tears and Harrison are people's ancestors. Like, they may be fictional, but you know them, because if you didn't know them, you would not be here. So writing Zeal was such physically and also spiritually important work for me, because even in those moments of doubt, self-doubt that you mentioned previously, I always felt there was a ticking time inside myself where I would feel reanimated again after about 3, 4 minutes and be like, something, you can keep going on. And I've always felt that I was watched over, particularly when I was doing Wandering Strange Lands and doing this type of ethnographical work in the South by myself. I didn't know any of these people. I didn't have anything, but I felt like I was protected. And I take that very seriously.
One of the characters in this book shares a trait that you have, which is that people often tell her that she sounds like she's from the South, even though she's not.
Mm-hmm.
Um, how has traveling through the South since this book has come out kind of changed for you?
Mm, the South is less of an amorphous region for me. I was born and raised in New Jersey. Um, I didn't grow up around grandparents that spoke about the past, really, and now they do, but we didn't ask, you know? So the South was an amorphous region for me. And what has happened since I stopped writing, but especially with Zeal, is like the South has become more contoured, more difficult to grasp, more vast than I could have expected. And so I feel like I could spend the rest of my life writing something inspired from the South because it is a place of reconnection for me. It feels like a siren call sometimes, and Zeal was definitely that siren call. I remember, like I mentioned before the event started 2 weeks ago, I saw the Mississippi River for the first time. I wrote about the Mississippi River in Zeal. It's on the cover of my book. And I remember going down there at sunrise and just crying. And I wasn't sad. It was just an emotional release of just tears because I thought about what all existed traversing the water and what all existed beneath it. And that was very heavy for me. And as soon as I cried and let it out, and then I was like, okay, I can start my day now. I just needed that moment with the water by myself. And that's when I realized, like, oh, I am very attuned. It's very heavy energy around here, and I'm really sensitive. And it's okay to be sensitive.
We see the cover of your book. I don't know if we can bring it up, but yeah, there it is. I just love that image of the Mississippi River. And one of the things that I love most about it, I'm not sure if we have an image of the back of the book to show everyone, but it's
Oh,
two mirrored images of these people who are kind of estranged on and looking towards each other on either side of the book, which I just love. And
thank you.
was was the sort of concept around the cover of the book something that you were involved in, or something that you got to weigh in on?
Oh, I was very involved. Initially we had this cover, and then I was like, can we show some other covers? And it was like a gradient in the beginning, like multicolored and to really stand out. And then my editor was like, I think we should go with the original, which is what you're seeing right now, because it's very evocative. And I'm glad she did that because it probably would have been a bit too overstimulating on the eyes. And yeah, when I saw it, when I showed my mother and one of my sisters the cover, they were like, "That's the cover." I always get people from my community, their opinions, and I I all I asked for before they got to sketching was I really want a water motif. I said water is so transformational, and it's so soothing. It represents matriarch. It's emotional. It can be destructive. It could be cleansing. It draws people away and to each other. And that's all I asked for. Because I'm not a visual person like that. I was like, just please could it have a water motif? And when people read it, they'll understand.
It is so funny to hear you say you're not a visual person, because this is the first book that I've read this year that felt like I could sit down and watch it. Like I would sit down for hours and watch any sort of like prestige dramatization of this incredible cast of characters moving through time in this like truly like cinematic way.
Thank you. But
So,
hopefully, but your lips to God's ears.
I mean, I hope there's a producer out there, because I want to sit and watch this. But I guess that kind of brings me a little bit to like a craft issue, because you do this really great thing where we move in and out of perspectives so seamlessly and so easily. I oftentimes struggle when we're, switching between character perspectives in different times and places. But sometimes you're doing it in the same paragraph where we enter in one person's perspective and then we end a paragraph in someone else's. And can you just talk a little bit about how you were thinking about all of these different characters sharing moments and bringing their own perspectives into those moments and then showing those moments from another perspective later? Um,
Yeah, this is so great. It's a great question. Another great question. I remember someone saying that you work in different registers, like the historical research, the language part of it. And it's so true now that I think about it. I just thought it was scaffolding, but it is true. I let the emotional register just guide me when I decide to show different perspectives. If we're talking about love, there's always a different side. There's always a different side. So, for example, Harrison and a woman named Tabitha who works at the Freedmen's Bureau, right? They meet and they reunite, and then you see it from her side because I didn't want people to think also, oh, like this woman just needs to get a man and she's gonna do whatever she has to do to have. Like, think about where she lives, think about the type of experience she's had, what's going on the inside. I think about when Tirza first meets Miriam, both in Kansas. Miriam is Harrison's daughter, and she sees her from across the room, and she's like, "This woman's face looks so familiar. Who is this person?" And then we switch and go to Miriam's perspective because that's where the story should be. Who is this person? Where did this woman come from? And especially in a woman's case, I didn't want them to be flat. So it felt like a natural choice to go back a little bit before going forward. So a lot of times I just went from the emotional registers of the book, where if we were spending a lot of time in people's heads, or if I gave you enough and I switch it a little bit to show the unevenness of even life and where misunderstandings can change the trajectory of an entire family. Like, I wanted people to see that. So definitely learning from the characters as the characters revealed themselves to me, and then having the discretion as a writer to switch registers when I dwelled in one for a little too long, rather.
No, it was really fun to just be in this book because we don't stay anywhere too long. And even when you pull us out, I think you kind of have that parental quality where it's just like, no, you've had enough. It's time
No,
for you.
yeah, you're done. You're done. Like if I'm talking about Harrison and I'm mentioning all of his lascivious activities, you're done. Like, you're done. Like, we'll get back to you in a minute. Like, it definitely was parental quality. And also because it's like that's so many generations. Like, my people probably been here for about 9 to 10 generations. At a certain point, I told myself the book has to end, and that was probably leads to your frustration with like, oh, why we didn't stay long. I'm like, listen, this book is 100,000 words. Okay, it's 400 pages. You could probably use it as a weapon if you throw it hard enough. And I was like, this is my longest book. At a certain point, we gotta wrap this up. And so I'm glad you liked it. And I also say my strength as a writer is that, and I used to tell my students this, is that I have to hook you from the first page. It has to have an energy behind it. Because if I come in there writing didactically in summer of 1865, it's gonna be a slog fest. So it had to have some propulsion behind it. That's why the first chapter, when I told you about earlier, like how I saw Harris and I saw that soldier, the line came to me. She was gone. And when that line came for me, I said, it's time to write. It fermented for so long with the research that I've been doing. I was like, it's time to write. You got the first line then.
Perfect. I I'm curious because the book has been out for a little bit. How have readers been responding to Zeal in particular? And are the responses you're getting to this book different from your others?
Oh, yes. That's a hell yes. Um, I say this a lot, but I am blessed and honored and thankful that my publisher has agreed to support me to grow as a writer, because sometimes you're only one and done. You get that one chance and that's it. And I am thankful to be with a publisher that has allowed me to grow as a person, as an artist for several years. And in turn, it has made me feel so good that there are people that have read my books all the way from the beginning, and they see the maturity that's, excuse me, I just drank kombucha, so I'm like, that see the maturity demonstrated in my prose, and especially from Black women. Like, sometimes I'll get DMs, I'll get tagged on Instagram with them reading it or saying how they felt. And that's all I ever wanted in the beginning, is that I'm getting certain responses that I never got before. You know, I'm hearing certain things that I had never, that I just thought about in myself, but I had to fake the funk to get to the next part to write something. And so the responses have been so warm and so laudatory that it makes me feel like I did do a good job. And you know, sometimes artists will go back and forth and they'll be like, oh, external validation doesn't matter. It does matter. I live by myself. I work by myself. I'm in my head all day long. And sometimes that isolation breeds great creativity, but also it breeds great loneliness and self-doubt. And when you have someone that reminds you, whether they lived in Mississippi, whether they live in Maryland, or whether they live in California or Texas, that they loved what you've written, especially Black women, I mean, it reminds me why I write. And it reminds me that like I said in the beginning, like I grew as a person, like I seasoned. And it reminds me that like my prose got a little bit more spice in it. And that feels just really reaffirming.
This kind of, I hate asking writers this question, and you don't have to answer it, but are you working on anything right now that,
Oh,
okay, yeah.
oh, I know you don't like it. I'm not.
Okay.
And I'm purposely not. And because the reason is that I have waited my whole life to get to this moment in my life where I'm not working out of survival mode. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little emotional because I used to think that my worth was predicated on my success. And I worked myself like a mule. I literally, I hate using that word, but that's how I felt. And I just felt like I peaked every time. I couldn't do any better. And that was the best that I could do. And now that I'm in my 30s, I'm learning that my body is not a prison, it's a haven. And I'm trying to enjoy every part of my life. And so a part of that is slowing down a bit, because even when I was in my 20s, I had a fear that I was going to get to a stage in my life, 70, 80 years old, and someone was going to interview me and say, do you have any regrets while you're writing? And I'm going to say, excuse my language, I would say, yeah, my biggest regret is that I was the shit and didn't even know it. And now that I'm in my 30s and I wrote this book that I love so much that I even read lines from it now, and I can't believe I wrote that. I want to enjoy my success a little bit more and stay in the moment more, because I did not afford myself that in the beginning. When I wrote This Will Be My Undoing in January 2018, by about February or March 2018, I was in the Deep South doing work on my next book that quickly. 2020, 2021, I published 2 books consecutively. Like, I want to fall in love again with a premise like I did with Zeal, and I'm going to chase it down. But right now, it's just like, I just want to love up on myself and the people in my life, and to enjoy what I just did, and to not miss this very special moment.
Oh, you definitely deserve that.
Thank
And
you.
Zeal is such a great monument to the incredible artist that you are. So
Thank you.
No pressure.
And I was like, like, because now I'm like, I did it again because I was like, did I pee? Because I'm like, this is, like they said, like you do your big one. I did my big one with this. I don't know if I can do it again. Like, and I guess that's what we as writers do, right? We're always trying to top our best efforts. And me, as I could be delusional, but I have to use the greats. I love music. I'm like, when Stevie Wonder finished Songs in the Key of Life, when he was like, is that it? At 26, I can't do anymore. When Prince produced Purple Rain, was he like, yep, you got it. That's a treat. I can't do anymore. What I do know is that I use this story from Miles Davis where he was being interviewed by someone, and the interviewer said, when do you think about music? And Miles Davis was like, all the time. And he was like, well, when? He's like, I'm thinking about it right now. Ideas chase me every single day. I'm always thinking of ideas. But at this point in my life, I'm allowing myself to rest and enjoy every facet of it and not look too far and be filled with anxiety. And I think my work will be better for it.
Perfect. I like that.
Thank you.
Right, we're getting close to, I guess, our hour mark. So one thing I do want to ask you about are just things that you're reading now, especially since you're giving yourself a bit of time. Um, and is there anything that you're looking forward to reading this year?
So I read this book called Marsha by Tourmaline. It's about Marsha P. Johnson. Tourmaline is an LGBTQ plus activist. She does a lot on uncovering the histories of those who are monumental in creating and upholding queer rights in this country. And I read this book a couple of months ago. It's actually out this week by Penguin Random House. And I read it a couple months ago because I love unsung stories. I love it. I love when someone is like, we don't know what happened to her, but that person lives. And I'm going to find out about them through the people who they touched, through the spaces that they traversed, all of that. And that's what Tourmaline does. So I love that book. I recommend it. There are a lot of low points, but there's a lot of high, just like joy in this person's life. Other than that, I'm watching a lot of movies. And this is gonna sound really funny, but like I live in Brooklyn by myself as an author. I'm enjoying my rent. So coming home every day with my, groceries or watching something on Netflix in my home. Like you see the books back there, like it's my home. I made this home, and I'm just enjoying that and finding allowing myself to feel my emotions still, even after Zeal is over, like feeling things and journaling and not being ashamed of them. Because I feel like I suppressed so much that in my 20s that now like I can see a commercial for like Annie the musical and I'll just start crying. Because I'll be like, I think about me being 6 years old. Like it's that type of thing. So I'm just enjoying my time and knowing that like I'm thinking of things, but it's like ask myself, is this something that you want to devote years of your life to? Because it's not like a screenplay where like you can write you can write 90 pages and you have to devote years of your life to something. So it does make me feel a little bit pressured in my mind, all self-manufactured, because I'm like, would you want to spend 4 years on something else? And it's like, it better be good,
Well, thank you so much. I don't want to go over, and I'm always a terrible timekeeper, so I'm really proud of myself right now. And it's 12:59 Central Time. But I think is this the point where we start taking questions?
Yes, we do have a few audience questions lined up. But first, before we get into that, thank you both so much. This was such a delightful conversation, and I enjoyed all of it.
Thank you.
The first question is from an anonymous audience member, and they're asking, what advice would you give young writers who are keen to tell ambitious stories?
To do it, because especially if you're a writer of color, you can't wait for that train to come. You gotta just go. and find your mode of transportation, figuratively speaking. I always figured out that the biggest hurdle for writers is to think that their voices matter. It's before you even get into the mechanics of craft. It's figuring out that, like, whatever matters to you. And if you have a story that makes you afraid, that it sticks with you, that is very visceral to you, say to do it. And it's okay, like I said earlier, to fake the funk. Sometimes you gotta go and sit in your little writing nook or whatever and say, I'm the shit. Whatever gets you through to your quota for the day, you're the only person that's capable of writing that story. Like, that's what I do. So a bit of artifice and also a bit of reinforcement, self-reinforcement.
Thank you for that answer. The next question is also from an anonymous audience member. And they're asking, or they say the writing is very cinematic, and asks, do you see this book being developed into a mini-series?
I hope so. I think the more Black people keep talking about it, like the voice will raise up to the heavens and come back down, like in manifestation, I mean, I see them in my mind. Like, I see the men that I would love to play Harrison, and the first thing I'll be like is, can you ride horseback? Well, then you're gonna learn. And then the second thing is, I don't want anyone sounding like they are from Atlanta when they should be from the Mississippi Delta. I cannot stand when I watch movies depicting Black people of a particular region and they don't sound like that. Like, so I would be really a stick on people who can ride horseback, and also accents. You gotta figure it out. Like, you gotta do something.
Thank you. The next question is also from an anonymous audience member. They ask, the story switches perspective. What are the key factors to shifting perspective successfully in your mind? How do these new registers open up the story for you?
Okay. How do I shift perspectives? Well, it does help with an editor, because there are many times my editor was like, we need to pull more out of you. It was like extracting a tooth. It was like, we need to stay there a little bit longer. The key to shifting perspectives is to ask yourself, did I reveal all I needed to reveal about them at this time? Because sometimes it's not all about laying everything on the line in the beginning. Sometimes you can withhold as a form of suspense. You can withhold as an Easter egg to something else that's going to come up in the future. Like the shooting scene that I read to you. There's no spoiler. It's gonna come back, And so I think, like, for me, it's like wondering how much weight each character is going to be in the story. Like, I spent a lot of time with Tears because I knew she was going to be around for long, literally and figuratively. But also just sometimes reading things aloud. Like, I know people also can sometimes edit by reading things aloud, and you can sort of know from your own discretion, like, oh, I spent a lot of time with this person. Did I make this other person like flat? And also you can use marginalia to sort of say, like, what am I revealing about each one? And is it a bit uneven? That sort of stuff.
And the next question is from me. I'm wondering how your teaching practice has impacted your writing practice, if at all. Or how
Like, I think, oh yeah, like so initially I teach from a holistic level. I am gonna be that parent that's like, your matter, your words matter. And I feel like I particularly have to do that for people who are people of color, women of color, especially, to let them know that their stories matter. But I think there have been many times when I'm teaching and I'm talking about gratuitous violence or trauma and how that can impact a narrative. And I definitely employed some of the same questions that I use for Zeal. Why am I using this device? How am I using it? Is it ethical? Is it responsible? Does it reinforce anything? Does it move the plot along? Does it reveal anything about the character? Right? So I think those types of questions come up for me, is that I look at my creative process not just as experimentation, but interrogation. It's okay to interrogate my own self of why I chose to make certain decisions that I made, so to figure out the justification for them. And sometimes they fall flat.
Thank you. And then the last question is from Elizabeth.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Magley. Morgan, thank you so much for gifting us all with Zeal. Stephen, thank you for leading this conversation. I'm so inspired. Morgan, I'm so glad that you're enjoying the fruits of your labor. That was like such an inspiring answer to hear. You mentioned during this conversation something that I picked up on right from the opening pages and I've been sort of enthralled with going through it, which is the towns and cities just place as much as the characters are as big of a part of this story. Um, I'm wondering, just as a writer, how you yourself achieve that, and then for other writers who might be working on pieces such as myself that are trying to achieve that same type of feeling with the place being a character in the book, what advice you would give for us?
So I would say don't overwhelm yourself because it is going to get overwhelming. I would take it step by step. So I wasn't looking at Natchez, Shreveport, and Nicodemus all at the same time. No way. If I'm thinking of Natchez, Natchez was considered one of the richest cities than Antebellum South. Forks of the Road slave market was the second largest slave market to New Orleans. So I could stay there for a very long time. And I would ask myself, okay, if I'm talking about formerly enslaved people, where would the plantations be? Where would the town center be in relation to the plantations? The bluffs. I remember I spent so much damn time on those bluffs, like because there was a Negro village down below. How would you scale the bluffs? How would you access? How would you get your horse up there? Like these are the certain things where, yeah, as Stephen admitted, it is a bit obsessive, but that's where the fun comes in because then now you're looking at characters as human beings. They weren't just in these particular towns and places happenstance, they lived in them. So I would say I'm very methodical. I use Google Doc, different color codes, adding my articles and all that to each folder and taking it step by step. And that's what I try to do. I talk back with some people about plots. Like, does this make sense? Okay, no, that's pretty terrible. And seeing if it'll be congruous to the time. Don't be afraid to interview people. I interviewed, if you look in the acknowledgement section, I interviewed historians, linguists, I interviewed archivists, and you'll be surprised how many people will email you back in a second and they love to talk to you because they spent their whole life waiting for someone to ask them something so incisive about what their life's passion is. So don't be afraid to do a little bit of journalist work that can help you get outside. You said even bounce some novel ideas off of them. They're not going to steal it. Like they're just like, what does this sound like? It would be of the time. And that's what I did. So I think it's okay to just take each section bit by bit, to soundboard off of other experts, and also do not be afraid to, again, just think about like the historical moments that were happening there and how your characters would fit in that in relation to your premise.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for that question, Elizabeth. That was our last question. Thank you so much, Morgan and Stephen. This was, again, so wonderful. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art for sponsoring our NSE program and making these daily conversations possible, and for their support of our growing archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel. The Rail has been free and independent for 24 years. A donation directly supports our writers, staff, and operations. Support our work through the link in the chat. And join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a conversation with Yvonne Argote and Melanie Kress on the occasion of Breathings at Peote. And as is Rail tradition, you can now all unmute and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Go
Thank
get
you.
Zeal.
Thank you. Such a fantastic
Thank you.
conversation.
Thank you. Pleasure. Bye.
Thank